All right, excited here with Rory Crawford. Rory Crawford is the CEO of Combat Fight Series, a longtime fighter himself, and it's really an honor to have him on. So, Rory, thanks for coming on, man. Enjoy it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. So let's get started. A little bit your roots. Obviously, I know you're a longtime K1 Muay Thai fighter.
Mhm.
What got you into fighting? Really, how did you start? What's your roots of getting involved?
So, I mean, if I go right back to the beginning, as a kid, I was always into sports, always. But I was sort of in and out of martial arts. I've done bits of karate, bits of boxing, judo. But to be honest with you, football was my sport, being soccer.
Yeah,
Played right up until I was about 16. And then, to be honest with you, I started drifting off and sort of going down the wrong path, really, to be completely truthful. Um, and when Thai boxing come along for me, it just come along at the perfect moment. Just hitting about 18 years old, and like I say, I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. And a friend of boxing, so I said, yeah, cool, and anyway, rang me up a couple of days later. He said, forget the boxing. He said, I found somewhere that does Thai boxing. And I knew what it was, but I didn't know the ins and outs of it. He said, they're elbowing each other, kicking each other, kneeing each other. So I said, yeah, great, we'll do that instead. So I went down there and just instantly got the bug for it, Say I was about 18 at the time. And once I started doing it, was just pad work classes at the start. So as soon as I started doing pads, I wanted to do sparring. As soon as I'd done the sparring, I wanted to fight. So it sort of snowballed really quickly, escalated really quickly. So from there, I moved to a gym that had a very, very good reputation for fighters and people that I knew that had trained there, called Kettle's Gym. So as soon as I walked into there, I just said to the owner, Alan, I want to fight. What have I basically got to do? He said, do all your classes, your sparring classes, make sure you're running, your pads, and I'll put you in for your first amateur fight. I think in the space of sort of 3 or 4 months, I had my first fight, and it just went from there.
nice. That was pretty quick. So you started fighting really right off the bat, huh? Once you started training and
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I just pretty much got the bug for it, and I'll stop doing things that I was doing before, and just completely chuck myself in to this, and it just come at a perfect time for me. And yeah, I pretty much just embedded myself in it, and all the time that I wasn't in the gym, I'm looking at fights. Then I was in the gym twice a day, and it completely took over my life, if I'm being completely honest.
mhm,
So it's come at a good time for me.
nice. So did you kind of turn pro right away, or did you have like a good amateur career? I mean, what steps did you take before? I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, every country sort of does it a little bit different. I know some countries that do 50, 60 amateur fights before you go pro. But in the UK, it's a little bit different, really. And I sort of had 3 or 4, I think, amateur fights, and then I just went straight into what we call C class, and then from there went up the levels from there. But yeah, I only had 3 or 4 into club fights, and that was it. Smooth straight on.
nice. And so did you go right into Muay Thai, or were you doing a K1 fights, like how, or more of the traditional kickboxing? What were your first early fights?
So I started in Muay Thai, and I think I got to about 10, 11 fights, and I started edging towards K1. It was just a little bit better for me, the way they score it. I was more of a puncher and a low kicker. So for me, I wasn't the most fluent kicker, Thai boxing. So for me, my style suited K1 a lot better. And I got through about 10 or 11 fights, Thai boxing, spent time in Thailand training, which is great. But then when I got to that stage where I thought I probably will be better off in K1, I went into K1 and I didn't look back from there, to be honest. I think I ended up having about 11 or 12 Thai boxing fights in the end.
Mhm. That's exciting. Yeah, I had seen that you did a little traveling. Went to Holland, went to Thailand. Tell me what the experience is. One thing with like Thai boxing or kickboxing, traveling to Thailand, no one's really ever explained to me. Like if you want to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you don't have to go to Brazil anymore. The U.S., England, the U.K., we have just as high-level coaches. What is it about kickboxing and Thai fighting especially that people need to go to Thailand? And I've heard people say there is a legitimate difference. Why is that? Why can't you get that same experience in London?
Do you know what it is? It's just, for me, it's just their passion. It's just, it's very hard. Well, it's not hard to explain. It's like, I suppose it's the equivalent of like the UK will have football, and that's celebrated massively. It's Thai boxing is their thing. You know, it's just celebrated massively. Just very very embedded in them. You know, from a young age, and very passionate about it. And it's I think if we had an affiliation with a gym in Thailand called Tip. So when I was at Keddles, we would actually have a Thai come over to Keddles. So they'd come over to the UK, and then when a guy from our gym wanted to go over to Thailand, we'd go to theirs. So there was a little bit of a connection there anyway. But I'd always wanted to go to Thailand to train. But yeah, you're right in saying it. There's a massive difference. I think when you go, if you get the right gym out there, you can get the touristy gyms, which is just really for just to say you've been there more than anything, could do a little bit of training. But if you're going there purely to train, to fight and compete, there's some gyms out there that can really up your game, you know.
Yeah, no, I believe that. So with the bug that you have for fighting, are you officially retired? You still think about fighting again, or are you like what's
Yeah, I mean, I think about it every day, to be honest with you. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I haven't fought for close to 2 years now.
Mhm.
And it was as soon as my daughter was born.
Yeah.
So before that, my life was just fight, train, fight, and that was it. That was all I cared about, to be honest. And
Yeah.
then when my daughter come along, it just everything changes, and I just couldn't really sacrifice my time to train, and I didn't want to miss anything, and my time was a lot more precious when my daughter come along. So it changed. But as she's getting a little bit older now, I'd love to say there's one or two more in there, but who knows? That's for the future.
Mhm. So as you transitioned over to promoting, what advantages would you say being a former fighter yourself? Like, you feel like it gave you a good advantage kind of making that transition over?
I think it did, yeah, because you know what the guys are going through. So I think, yeah, there's an emotional connection there. You've fought yourself. I've been on different promotions over the years. So although I don't know the ins and outs, or I didn't know the ins and outs at the time of how the shows run, I knew a bit. I knew enough. So I think, yeah, it's helped me definitely, because you build up the contacts over the years as well with guys. I have good relationships with gyms and other fighters that have fought on my show since. So I think, yeah, it's done me well having competed, to be honest. I
Hmm.
think it's quite common now for a lot of promoters. You'll find that they have competed in the past, and yeah, I think that does help, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, you think it's a matter of trust? Maybe the fighters are going to trust you a little bit more, or just like you said, maybe understanding how the shows work.
I think so. I think when they know that you've been there as well and done it, you can talk on a level to a fighter. Then I think sometimes if you haven't been there yourself, you haven't really got that understanding between you. So like I say, I've got guys that I've trained with years ago actually fighting on my show, and people that I've known and built up a relationship as I've gone. So it's definitely helped me, I think,
Hmm.
having fought myself. And you still got the passion there. Although I'm not fighting, that bug, that passion never leaves. So when I'm on my own shows watching fights, I'm still by the edge of the ring, getting excited and getting excited for them and nervous for them.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. I mean, what trait would you say you've learned about yourself, or maybe something that you've discovered when you got into promoting that maybe could help other fighters again towards the end of their career, or maybe want to venture into the business side of it?
I mean, I'm always one of them guys that's just, I'll always help someone out. If someone asks me a question, I'll always make time for people and just share a little bit of experience. And I'm still learning myself, I'm still fairly young. So I'm still learning as I go. But if I can help anyone along the way, I'll always make time to, you know, give my 2 cents to them and hope it helps. But I think you learn a little bit about yourself through life anyway, not just shows. I'm still teaching and coaching, so I'm learning all the time when I'm coaching. I'm learning when I'm putting on shows. So yeah, I think you grow yourself a little bit. After each one, it's starting to become a little bit more normal now doing the shows. At first, I found it a little bit difficult, if I'm being completely honest, because I wanted to get in there and fight. It was really weird. The first show I put on, it threw me out a little bit, because normally I'm used to going to the venue to fight, and now I was putting the show on and people running around asking me questions, and it was a little bit weird and threw me out for the first one, but now it's becoming that little bit more normal each one, you know.
Hmm. And from what I hear, the fights have kind of continually grown for you. I believe your last show was sold out, if
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
yeah.
Congrats, man. Are you guys looking to expand as far as maybe larger venues here in the future? Which I know with the lockdown, everything's weird, but maybe across Europe. And I mean, is there already
I
future
mean,
plans set up?
yeah, definitely. I mean, 100%. I mean, you want to make it as big as possible. I mean, for me, I always look for longevity, so I'm not looking to just put a couple of shows on, maybe get a couple of years out of it, and then move on to something else. You know, I always look long term. So I'm thinking, right, we can build this and build this and build this. But we started off at a fairly small venue, 700 people, and then we got the Indigo at the O2, which holds a few thousand, and we managed to pretty much sell out on a Sunday, which was brilliant. Had a great card, which helps. You know, people come to watch them fights, so it's very important. The matchmaking and making sure you've got the right fights on and fights that people get excited about and want to come and watch and support. So that was brilliant. And then we sort of built up a little bit of momentum. And then unfortunately the lockdown happened, which was obviously out of our hands. But we're hoping as soon as it's back to normal, we're just going to keep pushing and pushing. We've got 4 dates sort of lined up for next year. If everything goes to plan, the possibility of one maybe at the end of this year, but again, it's just government pending to see if we can put it on. But yeah, we're looking to push and push. Eventually, I know a few promoters from abroad, and I'd love to link up and do some stuff abroad as well. But at the moment, we're just looking in the UK to keep pushing and get the name out there and expand from there. You know.
Hmm. 100%. And how involved as a CEO? I mean, are you doing the matchmaking? Are you finding fighters? I guess I'm asking, how much are you involved in the business? Are you doing everything? Are you learning to kind
Yeah,
of
I mean,
delegate as you grow?
pretty much. I mean, it's me, and I actually have a partner as well, James Wallace, who does the boxing side. So, how the show come about at first was my partner, now James, was running a boxing show, and when I stopped fighting, took a little break. He said, "Well, why don't we do a show together?" He said, "You know, you do the Thai boxing, the K1, and a few MMA if we want to have MMA on. You do the boxing side, and we push the show together." And that's how we started. So I've got him that looks after the boxing side, looks after that end of it, and then I look after the matchmaking for the Thai boxing, K1, and the MMA when we have some MMA fights as well. And then from there, yeah, we look after. We've got a great team behind us, some really good people that have been in the sport a long time, and it just makes our jobs a hell of a lot easier because everything can run a little bit smoother. So got a really good team behind us, but yeah, matchmaking wise, it's down to us too.
Okay. And I always like to ask people this, how's the reception been in the UK? I know here in the US, I'm 43 now. I got into jiu-jitsu martial arts when I was 18, so quite a while ago. And it was hard to put on jiu-jitsu shows. I remember MMA, all that stuff when it first came out it was really hard. With boxing, was trying to block a lot of it, and it was really hard to get things going. I think 3 years ago, even in New York, it finally legalized in New York just a few years ago,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
obviously one of the biggest city in the country.
Mhm.
So what's been the reception been like in the UK as far as getting the Thai boxing going, the MMA? I mean, is it wide open now? You guys fine, or is it still, depending on province or state, you guys still have issues?
I mean, yeah, I mean, like legal wise, I mean, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, there's shows going on all the time. But from the sort of 12 years that I've been fighting and competing in the sport, I've just seen it just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And some of that is actually down to the shows abroad as well. You know, big shows like One Championship. Obviously, the UFC's been around for a long time. You've got Glory Kickboxing, which is massive as well. So these sort of shows draw people in the UK to want to train and want to compete as well. So they're actually quite important as well. But I've seen, yeah, the UK scene is strong. You know, we've got some great fights coming out of the UK, and great fighters that are now getting signed to promotions like Glory and UFC and One Championship. So yeah, I think the UK is strong at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh no, I was actually just speaking with someone from UK a couple weeks ago, and the UK scene's really exploding. I was telling him the same thing. Here in the US, it was pretty much all American fighters. It's all we saw on television. So maybe 10 years ago, I'd say, and then all of a sudden, we see a ton of the UK fighters over here now. I mean, it's really, I've always assumed there's been that explosion there as well, that to kind of carry overseas.
I think the talent's always been there, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I just think more and more people now getting into it, which
Mhm.
obviously creates more fighters, which means that you can put on more shows and it's just getting people onto that big stage. You know, and these guys are deserving of it. You know, some of these UK fighters deserve to be on that big platform. So it's great for the UK. You know.
Yeah, no, I think it's great for everybody. Get more, better talent, better fights, and obviously, hopefully, all of the fighters can get paid more by having more exposure.
Well, this is it really. I mean, in my opinion, like fighters don't get paid nowhere near enough. You know, that's my personal opinion. I haven't been in the sport for a while. So it's a shame, but you know, some of these bigger promotions now, if they can start paying the guys, it's what they deserve. So
I'm with you 100%. I mean, when you see what the fighters get paid in the UFC, then you see what the UFC is bringing in for pay-per-view money. I mean, it's not going to the right people, I don't think, my personal opinion. But
yeah, I mean, even in the UFC, I mean, I know a few guys that fought in the UFC, and people think because you've got it in the UFC, that's it. You're making millions, and it doesn't work like that. You know, some of these guys are maybe getting a couple of grand to start off with. It's only until you're really, really up there that you're making what I would call proper money and enough money to warrant fighting as a career. And I used to say to people, you know, when started Thai boxing, don't do it for the money because there isn't any money. You've got to do it for the passion and then hope that that builds up into something. And for Thai boxing especially, I think one championship's been a godsend because it's a massive promotion and they're paying a little bit more money now for these guys. So now they've got something to look forward to or towards, should I say, because you know there isn't really enough. Well, what I would say enough money in Thai boxing and K1 and MMA, to be honest, unless you're at the pinnacle, you know.
hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. So when you're matchmaking, what are you looking for in matchmaking when you're trying to get your card set up? You know, what are exactly you looking for? Is there a certain goal you have in mind? And how I asked this, I talked to a matchmaker before, and he goes, my goal is to have every fight go to the decision. Now, obviously, it's not, nobody wants to see all decisions, but he meant as far as seeing the back and forth and almost a flip of a coin on every single, with the odds makers. Is there
Yeah.
any certain goal that you have when you go to matchmaking? So you're just looking for pure excitement? Or are you trying to match styles? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, me when I was fighting and when I was looking at fights, I liked the powerful guys, the big punchers, the finishers. But that you have to switch that off sometimes, especially with matchmaking, because you've got to get the other guys in for the technical fights, the smarter fighters, not just the brawlers and the knockout artists. So you have to look at every fight, and just sort of sit down and think that'd be a good match, that'd be a good match. And it happens a lot. I'll put on a show and think that guy would be good for this guy or that guy, so your mind starts ticking over then. But I like the back and forth fights. When I fought K1, a lot of K1 was sort of back and forth, at all action. It's good for the crowd. But then I can appreciate the technical fights that go the 5 rounds, and some people might sit there and go, "Oh, that's a little bit boring," but they don't appreciate the technique behind it and the IQ level behind that fighter and the game plan that fighter set out to win that fight. So I think you have to have a little bit of everything there. You can't just have just sort of one, and just think, right, he's going to knock him out in the first round. That's going to be over in the first round. You've got to have that balance. I think it's good to have, the technical fighter, the big puncher, the 50-50 fight, it's, try and get a little bit of everything on.
Yeah, it makes great sense. I mean, because I think you said with those technical fighters, sometimes fighters might cheer or clap for reversals that the average fan who's not really into combat sports wouldn't know, and vice versa. People want to see that excitement, want to see the knockout.
Yeah, I
How
mean,
do you feel?
if you're not educated on it and you're just sort of going to support a mate, but you don't really know, you're not educated on Thai boxing, the scoring, and what goes into it. Some of them fights, I can really appreciate because I've been in the sport a long time, so I can watch 5 rounds, and what another person would say, "Oh, that's quite boring." I'd say, "No, technically, it was a very good fight." They come out with good game plans, very smart. They weren't just going in trying to kill each other. So you got to try and have a little bit of everything to keep everyone happy.
Yeah, I think you've seen a lot of sports. Like here, us in the U.S., American football is our big sport, and it's the scoring's through the roof now. I mean, there's tons of scoring, which the purists, everyone, hates because we want to see defense. But it's making more money than it's ever made. The fantasy football, all that's sky high. And I think you see the same with the UFC and boxing. It's what brings the casual fan to buy the pay-per-view or to watch it on TV.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is why you get, these knockout artists. People pay to watch them because they want to see, as brutal as it might sound. Unfortunately, this is the sport, but people want to see people get, knocked out and hurt, and this is just, the industry that we're in.
Mhm. How do you feel on personalities? Maybe a strong personality, kind of the shit talkers. Some people kind of almost sell themselves. I mean, do you like dealing with that type of crowd as a promoter because it sells itself, or do you are you a little more traditional? You kind of like the more humble fighter that sells themselves by their actual ability?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, the second one, I like to think, I like to match a fight and go, that's going to be great. But on the flip side of that, got nothing against people hyping up a fight because it's great, because it's great for the show as well. And social media's played a big part in this now.
Mm,
Say sort of 10 years ago, it wasn't really as, I don't even think Instagram was out 10 years ago. But it wasn't really that much going back and forth between Thai boxers and K1 because there wasn't, social media wasn't really that big. So you judge it on going, right, that's going to be a good fight because he's from a good gym and he's from a good gym. So that would sort of sell it. Whereas now you're getting people on Instagram sort of slagging each other off and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Little bits of press conferences and stuff. So it's great. It's an entertainment. It might not be particularly my cup of tea. I just like to sort of look down and go, right, he's a good fighter. He's a good fighter. Them two are going to make a good match. And that for me sells it enough. But that doesn't mean that I don't agree with, the bravado stuff and, calling each other out. I think it's great. It's great entertainment. So I think shows need it, to be honest. Because if
mm.
it gets people talking and it gets bums on seats, then, it's doing its job.
No, 100%. And now, as a fighter, how did you feel on that? I mean, I'm sure you must came across these little smack talkers that you're gonna. I mean, did it bother you? Get on your skin? I mean, how did you handle it when it happened to you?
Yeah, like someone asked me that question not long ago, actually, in an interview, and I said it was never a bit of me, I just never. I think you'll find more in Thai boxing and K1, to be honest with you. It's a little bit more of a respectable sport,
Mm,
if that makes sense. You don't really get too much sort of bad blood and squaring up to each other at weigh-ins and stuff like that. It just wasn't really not something that I've sort of, you might have a little bit of a stare down with someone at a weigh-in. That would be pretty much it. It was only really when you see things like boxing where there's millions and millions of pounds at stake, and you see them shoving each other at the weigh-in and picking the tables up and throwing them, and then you start seeing it a little bit in the UFC because there's so much money involved. I think the entertainment side of it can add a little bit of value to that fight, if that makes sense. Whereas the Thai boxing and K1, it wasn't. If you was in that scene, you'd know who was a good fighter and if that was going to be a good fight. You didn't really need too much behind it. You see a little bit more of it now, which is good. Some guys that genuinely dislike each other, which is great. If you've got two guys that dislike each other, let them fight. It makes for a good story. Good promotional videos. Good on social media to promote. So yeah, it makes sense. But yeah, not when I was fighting, it wasn't really. It wasn't really there as much, to be honest.
mm. Yeah, I think that's one of those things in the martial arts world. When I brought friends to shows and I've introduced people to it, they're always shocked at how humble and really how friendly a lot of the people are. And I think it was always more in boxing, and I think it kind of entered the MMA world. I mean, I think McGregor. I mean, he was probably the big, but again,
Yeah,
he made a lot of money, and I think it's now you see some of these younger fighters almost trying to kind of
imitate.
copycat. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, but this is, it's an entertainment industry as well, and these shows are much, much bigger on a massive scale. They're selling out 30,000, 40,000 arenas. So in the UK, I think the biggest sort of, shows that are going on in the UK are sort of 3,000 or 4,000 people in there, to be honest. At Thai boxing shows, that would be classed as a big show. When you've got these massive arenas, the entertainment side of it comes into play then, because you think, right, if I can hype this up a little bit and get that person to push the person at the weigh-in and get him to say something about him, if it sells tickets, then of course they're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So again, back to you as a fighter. Who do you like to watch? I mean, maybe growing up, maybe currently. Who are you a big fan of?
So growing up, I mean, I was at the early stages before I'd done Thai boxing. I was always a massive boxing fan, and for me, it was Mike Tyson. I was, he was the one that that I enjoy to watch the most. And I can remember getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to what, you know, my dad would wake me up, come downstairs, you know, 3 minutes later I'm walking back upstairs because he'd finish them so quick. But I just liked his aggressive style. Everything was done with speed and power. Great knockout artist. So yeah, for boxing it was him. And then when I went into Thai boxing, I watched a lot of Ramon Deckers, and he was the one really that I would sort of, you know, before training, I would get him up on YouTube, and that would be motivation for me to go and train. And I watched a lot of Deckers growing up in Muay Thai, and really liked him. And then going forward from there, I mean, K1, I liked Gokhan Saki. I thought he was a really good fighter. But yeah, there's a few really. I always like that style, that Dutch style, what I call, which is quite aggressive, and I can appreciate that a little bit more.
Mhm. What exactly would you say separates that Dutch style? Because that's another obviously famous area where a lot of good stand-up fighters come out of and kickboxers come from. What separates their style?
I just think the aggression. You know, I'm not saying that Thai boxers aren't aggressive, because, you know, another Thai boxer I love as well was Anawat, and he was a knockout artist. You know, an absolute machine. But I think the Dutch just took that, especially that K1 style. They brought that aggression, and everything was, you know, hard hitting. And I saw the difference a lot from, I would train in Thailand quite a lot, and then when I went into K1, I went to Holland, and I trained at Vos Gym in Holland, and it was just like a completely different world. It was, I think I see like 3 or 4 people get knocked out in the first few days, you know, sparring. And when you sparred there, it was like you was having a fight. You know, it wasn't like sparring. It was you was in there to have a fight. So I saw the difference straight away. You know, in the way that a Thai would spar to them. You know, and that's their style. You know, they're very good at it. Very good at it.
Yeah. How do you feel on that? I mean, what's your personal opinion as a coach, or I guess maybe as a former fighter on the sparring? Because I've heard mixed reviews. Some people, say the hard sparring is going to shorten your career over time. You'll have more injuries, and other people obviously believe in it. They think you're getting more ready for a fight that way. I mean, what's your personal opinion on that?
So for me, I always like to spar hard, but that was just me. But for longevity, 100%. I mean, I'm 32 now, and I've got injuries that are just probably never going to go away. You know, broken bones and stuff like this, and all wear and tear from hard sparring. So I always preferred the hard sparring. But then as a coach, you can't, just because I did, that doesn't mean that another fighter is going to be suited to that, because there's some guys that are really good fighters, but they just, you know, they don't spar hard. They're more technical fighters, so you shouldn't really get them trying to kill each other. So I believe in a bit of a mixture. You know, you have your harder days when you're sparring, where you have got to go for it a little bit more, and then you have your technique side of it as well, because the technique's just as important. You know, with no technique, you're just brawling. So for me, it's having a mixture of the both, and having that the technical side of it, the technical sparring, and then have your hard sparring as well.
Mhm. So what are you recommending for you guys right now during the lockdown or the quarantine here? What do you have your fighters doing? I mean, I imagine it's obviously can't be doing a lot of sparring. I'm not sure how many gyms are open there. Any word of advice you have for them, or anything you're telling them to do right now?
No, I mean, at the moment, we're still, I mean, I'm taking a few lessons outside. You can do a little bit outside. But in terms of gyms, everyone's still in the dark. So no, we've been told about July the 7th, I think, was like a provisional date that people are looking towards. But I'm still in contact with fighters, because we're supposed to have 3 more shows for this year, but that have all been at the moment cancelled. Possibility of one at the end of the year, maybe December time. But these guys are still training. Obviously, they can't spar and stuff, but they're still out running and doing bits of pads and stuff. So it's hard for them, because these guys want to get back in and fight, you know. So it's tough. I mean, I think if I was still fighting at this time, I'd find it really hard. I'd really struggle, I think, if I'm being honest. Because when you're fighting, you have your fight, and then all you're thinking about is the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, and that's how it works. So I can imagine it's really frustrating for these guys. But they're doing as best as they can, and they're still ticking over and doing bits. So really, we're just waiting for, you know, for lockdown to be released, and a little bit of guidance on what we can do. And I'm pretty sure that as soon as we get the green light to go, guys are going to be wanting to fight. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed, really.
All right. Well, I guess before we go here, if fighters want to be on your show, how do you find fighters? How do they find you?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the Instagram page, Combat Fight Series. We're on Facebook, Combat Fight Series. We've got a YouTube channel under Combat Fight Series as well. Or you can message me direct, Rory Crawford. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. So yeah, just drop us a message. You can see some of the previous shows on there as well.
All right, Roy. I mean, best of luck. I really appreciate your time. Any shout outs, anything you want to say before we get off?
No, just thanks for your time as well. Yeah, it's always good to do these as well and get the name out a little bit as well. So yeah, just to thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time. Rory Crawford. All right, thanks.